But once again, we must embrace the boldness and innovation that our city is renowned for. We must turn our policies into progress and unite to build one Seattle together. The state of our city is that we are ready and willing to put in the hard work. Let's do it together. One Seattle.
That's Mayor Bruce Harrell and his 2023 State of the City Address, promising some bold action, especially downtown. So how's that going to work out? And how has he come through on the promises he made last year? Plus, why is the Seattle City Council voting on a piece of legislation that has to do with India's caste system? And also, how will a new work-in-person policy from Amazon impact our city? Well, we are discussing those stories and so much more here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel, and the views expressed here are mine. And joining me is my co-host, Dave Roman. And David, I saw you writing recently about an AP report on artificial intelligence chatbots. I didn't realize that AI could get belligerent so quickly. These are amazing to see these stories come out.
Yeah, this is the second kind of big one after that big New York Times one. It's fascinating, and I think a lot of people are focusing on the sentient, not sentient question, but that almost doesn't really. Obviously, it's not sentient, but the fact that Microsoft released this thing to the world without realizing its sort of default would be to be basically a belligerent autofill feature is
it's a jerk. Yeah.
Slightly concerning that they didn't kind of catch this before. I mean, I guess they are. I mean, they're giving it to people to test out, but I find it all frankly kind of hilarious and a little scary.
Yeah. So far. Yeah. If they can switch it out of jerk mode, maybe they got something there. We'll have to see how that goes. Well, David, thank you as always for joining me. Thanks to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast on the first floor of Seattle City Hall. Thanks to our patrons too. The Seattle News, Views, and Brews sticker campaign is alive and well and rocking right now. You can see these awesome decals that we're sending out to our patrons that are at the $5 or more per month level. I'm sending those out. Morty, I got one heading your way. He's one of our most recent patrons. Your sticker's heading out there. A few more heading out to our longtime patrons too over the next couple of weeks here. And just a heads up here, folks, from the Seattle Department of Transportation, this week we're expecting some temperatures getting down in the high teens or the 20s. So please keep those sidewalks around your home clear of ice. Be a good neighbor out there. Cut back on driving in icy conditions if you see them. Also, make sure you're getting some extra groceries and staying safe, and keep an eye on that forecast. It's going to change here. Learn more at seattle.gov/winter-weather. Thank you, SDOT. Thanks also to Converge for airing the video version of this podcast Wednesdays at 7. All right, it's go time right here, right now. So on Tuesday of this week, Mayor Bruce Harrell issued his 2023 State of the City Address at Fisher Pavilion in the Seattle Center there. And David, I thought your Seattle Times colleague Danny Westneat asked a great question. How do you sum it up for a speech like this one? Is the city looking iffy for the future, not doing too badly here? He's entering the second year of his term. He's talking about a lot of boldness in terms of revitalizing downtown, working on public safety. And it really does feel like the honeymoon is over to me. But I'd like your thoughts on just a hot take real quick on what he was talking about today with the state of the city.
Well, I think I think it's exactly the sort of speech I would expect Bruce Harrell to give. A lot of sweeping language, but not a ton of sort of specifics. Although, that said, he did pledge to make this, another department that
third public safety department, right?
Which, departments. That sounds like more bureaucracy in some ways, but on the other hand, in theory, it's intended to do kind of what the Seattle City Council and City Hall has been saying they want to do for a few years now, and for some reason has not, which is come up with some kind of alternative to policing as a real option for public safety. But I think that will be the kind of most interesting thing to watch. That said, I've seen a few different press conferences now and a few different announcements around some sort of alternative to policing. And as far as I can tell, we don't actually have that much of it. So, that department will be interesting. But, other than that, I don't know. I guess I'm curious to hear your takeaways too.
Yeah, no, I kind of was in the same boat here, David, because I'm thinking back to last year. And if you remember back then, we were in a different place definitely with the COVID pandemic. You had a bunch of people in masks behind the mayor there. He was in his secure seventh floor office. This time he was out in public. There was a difference there. I remember last year at this time, we were also in the middle of this crazy delay for the reopening of the West Seattle Bridge because that concrete strike and stuff. So there's some different things, but I really did. It struck me just how much, in terms of what you're talking about too, these same things are what he was talking about last year as well, when he was just 6 months in on the job. He was talking about, let's establish this third type of public safety department that can respond to these low acuity calls. Let's talk about hiring more police officers, 125 of them. He did not do that last year. It ended up being closer to 50 officers by the time 2022 went away. So I think I hear what you're saying. There's a lot of boldness in terms of what he's wanting, in terms of revitalizing downtown. And we're going to talk about Amazon here in a little bit. But for right now, it just feels like it's in a little bit of a holding pattern. I don't know. There were a lot of similarities between last year's speech and this one with the state of the city.
Right. Well, and one of his biggest priorities is downtown. Which you can understand why, but as mayor, that's sort of tricky territory, because you're talking about intersection of businesses and private organizations and traffic and public safety, kind of all in this one place. So mayors have been talking about trying to fix up downtown, specific parts of downtown, for many, many years, and beyond sort of hotspot policing,
which he's very big on.
Which he is big on, and which past mayors have been big on. I haven't seen a lot of sort of hyper specific proposals around how City Hall could actually get involved in that. I think there's some chat about Third Avenue and redoing Third Avenue to make it a more welcoming place, but that is a pretty massive project. So, there's a lot of talk about downtown, but I am not any clearer on what City Hall intends to do exactly with downtown.
No, I feel the same way. I think I've definitely got my eye on this third public safety department, CARE, the CARE department as it's being called right now. And I'll work on making sure I memorize that acronym next time. But it's one of these situations where we're looking at that. We're looking at the Regional Homelessness Authority asking for some more money so they can take care of some of these different hotspots of homelessness around our area too. So I think this is really a much more of a test year for the Harrell administration to really come through on these things that, again, they really were talking about this last year. They're talking about them again this year. Are they going to be able to turn the corner on hiring more officers? There was a good fourth quarter for the SPD, but are we going to see that continue into 2023 in terms of shootings and gun violence, et cetera? I'm not 100% sure on that. Are we going to see some turning of the corner when it comes to revitalizing downtown and businesses? I'm with you. I think there's a lot of questions still on this one, but how about this? We'll put a pin in this one and we'll keep on checking it as the year progresses here, and definitely see what happens with police and public safety. I think a lot with that over the next couple of months. I did want to touch on something else with you here, David, something that might get overshadowed with the mayor's speech this week, a vote from the council about the caste system in India. So Councilmember Sawant has proposed a measure that the council is set to pass this week that says discrimination based on caste is illegal in Seattle. There was a great story by your colleague, Naomi Ishizaka, in the Times, David, about this. I hadn't realized that this type of discrimination is happening in Seattle, but apparently it is. We don't have a lot of great statistics on it happening, and that's a piece of this that's problematic. But I just wanted your take on this move by the council to add caste to this list of things you can't discriminate on in the city of Seattle. What did you think about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I like you. I have no sense of how common this is. My colleague had a example of, had a character in her story that allegedly had been discriminated against because of her caste. So I didn't even realize that was a possibility.
Right.
I think there was one argument was that, that would fall under some of the existing protections, but then maybe wouldn't, because there's some nuance to caste systems. So it's fascinating to me. What it really does is makes me want to report it out more, which is see if there's actual documented cases of this. My hunch is no, which isn't to say that it doesn't happen, but how do you I think, as again Naomi pointed out, filing a complaint or going to HR with a allegation of caste discrimination, I imagine that most organizations aren't super well set up to handle that. And, I guess that then is an argument in favor of doing this, because then they have to be in a position to do something about it. It's not surprising that it comes from Councilmember Sawant. I think a lot of her politics are based in a rejection of the caste system. She grew up in Mumbai, and it's a very hierarchical, discriminatory system. And I think a lot of her worldview is shaped by growing up around that.
Very true. And it was interesting too, David, to look at this a little bit more closely. There was some pushback from the Hindu American Foundation about this. There was some concern that this measure would end up unfairly targeting Indian people, which I'm certain they don't want to happen here with this, but it could end up unfairly targeting these people who make up 2% of the U.S. population, and maybe a little bit more here in Seattle, but not a large part of the population. I guess I'm just trying to figure out if a measure like this would cause rifts within the Indian community, and maybe those rifts need to happen. As you say, maybe we need to put it out more in the open, but it's interesting to see who is going to be the target, if you will, of a law like this, an ordinance like this.
Yeah, totally. I don't know the answer to that. I will say that I suppose of any place in the country to do this, if you wanted to do it, it'd be better if you could kind of expand it to the east side too. But, there's a sizable South Asian Indian population in this region, particularly because of the tech jobs, and Microsoft and Amazon, of course, draws from all over the world, and it's why we have why if you go to Magnuson Park on a Sunday, you'll see a ton of people playing cricket. There's a pretty big and vibrant community around here. So if it was happening, I suppose Seattle or Bellevue is a place that it could be happening, but I don't know that it would be even possible to measure how often this is happening.
And if there's any place in the country that's going to do work like this, it's going to happen in Seattle as well. So I'm interested to see how this one pans out as well. And just a note, folks, if you haven't read the book already, Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. David, have you read that one? She's a journalist from the Chicago area. It's a great.
No,
book.
I read Warmth of Other Suns, but I haven't read Caste.
It's incredible. This one's a more of a non-fictional account, and just calls out our own racialized systems in the U.S. It's a terrific read, just looking at it as a caste system of our own. Martin Luther King meeting with Gandhi, talking about this kind of stuff. It's fascinating, and it really plays out that maybe it's a different word, but it's setting up a racial system and an unfair racial system in different countries, and how that plays out, or how it has played out in the U.S. So definitely a good conversation to have, and I appreciate you joining in with it. All right, well, moving on here. Amazon workers are being called back to the job at least 3 days a week starting on May 1st. So what does that mean for the company? What does that mean for downtown Seattle? We're talking about those questions and a lot more in our next segment here. Now hear this. Well, a big story from the business world, from Amazon, conveniently buried last Friday at the start of a holiday weekend. But CEO Andy Jassy wants his workers back in the office at least 3 days a week, starting on May 1st. I was able to talk to Puget Sound Business Journal reporter Alex Halverson about this last week on Week in Review on KUOW. He noted that Amazon has a lot of real estate downtown, and it doesn't look right if they're not using it.
From a portfolio standpoint, they don't want those to just be a waste. They want their campuses to be lively. There's a reason they put their campus in the middle of Seattle.
Right.
They didn't want a campus that's far away, closed off. They want it to be part of the city. When there's nobody in that campus, then they're not good corporate citizens. Reflectively, and they want people there.
All right, David. Before we get to how excited folks like the Downtown Seattle Association are to hear this news, how is this going to roll out? How will it work? Are they going to be checking badges every week to make sure people are checking in here? I just know there's going to be some pushback from employees who've been working from home and doing just fine with their jobs for the past 2+ years. I'm just trying to get your take on how you think this is going to go among the rank and file workers of Amazon.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine there will be some frustration. I think kind of the most interesting part of this story, though, is the whiplash of worker leverage and world.
Totally.
Companies tried to start talking about this stuff like a year ago, and they just couldn't do it because people would quit at the drop of a hat, knowing that they would get picked up instantly somewhere else. That's just not true anymore. No one in fact, Amazon is laying people off, and so are basically every other tech company. So
Right.
it's, I think the timing of it, partially because of the trajectory of the pandemic and feeling like it's important for the company or whatever it might be. But really, I think it's because they probably feel pretty confident at this point that they can roll this out, which I think they've been wanting to do for a long time. They've started and stopped a few different times, and know that they're probably not going to lose hardly anybody over this. And so, the rank and file, I bet they don't feel great about it. And also, I feel like they probably recognize that the leverage they used to have just does not exist anymore.
Yeah, if you want to keep your job, you're gonna end up coming back to work 3 days a week. I am interested on how it's gonna actually get rolled out, but I'm with you. I think I hear what you're saying with regard to all the different layoffs that are happening in the tech world. But looking at that bigger question of the impact this could have for downtown Seattle, the DSA, of course, was to the moon over this one. Super happy about seeing Amazon getting thousands of people, literally thousands of people, back downtown here and helping out in that way. I guess I'm trying to figure out if a big employer like this is going to push other businesses to follow suit and get more people to come back downtown. Is this that kind of prime mover that's going to kind of bring other businesses with it? What do you think?
I don't know, but if any business is, it would be Amazon, of course. I think, it was a couple of years ago. It wasn't at the paper at the time, but Seattle Times wrote about how I think Seattle is the biggest company town in the country as far as commercial real estate goes. And so, this isn't this. I guess I'm always skeptical about how much of an impact any one company can have. But when it comes to Amazon, it's hard to say that. What is it, 50,000 people maybe?
Yeah, it's a lot. Right.
Downtown. I mean, that's like, I don't know what that is as far as percentage of total downtown population. But when when you're looking at office occupancy still at 40%, and then you add 50,000 more people to that, I think that is meaningfully going to make a difference. And then there's, restaurants and grocery stores are going to want to staff up a little bit more. I went to Whole Foods because our office is by
pretty close.
It's basically in Amazon country.
I
went in the other day and I went to Whole Foods, and there were basically no checkers. There was a single checker there. And so then you start to think, well, if Amazon comes back, do they bring in more checkers because suddenly Whole Foods is busier? And, I do think that there are certain ripple effects to it. And then, I think a lot of companies are going to wait for a second and see kind of, do people start leaving Amazon, and what kind of effect does it have on their workplace? And then if the answer is no, which I suspect it will be, then that kind of sets a precedent. So, again, I don't know if the answer is yes, but if any company is going to have that kind of broad effect, it will be Amazon.
Yeah. I don't know. The Whole Foods example is a good one, but I sometimes in my heart of hearts call that store Whole Paycheck, because you can really spend a lot of money there. But I think that'll be it's true. But it's so good. But I wonder about that piece, because there's been little bits and pieces of downtown revitalizing, and I think a lot of people lay that at the feet of the city of Seattle to make some changes there. But clearly some work has to be done by the business community too. It can't just be the city doing the job. It has to be employers coming back as well to be part of that equation and seeing downtown rebound. So,
I do think that's why, Seattle has always had the low, if you look at other cities, their office occupancy is higher than Seattle, except for other examples being San Francisco or Portland, maybe, but other tech places. But, it is really the reason why Seattle has had such low office occupancy is, I think, because Amazon just hasn't come back. And it's also the reason why Seattle kind of kept its COVID number so low, is because Amazon was really the first big company to shut its offices. And really, so, Amazon has already proven that, it kind of sets policy in some ways for the city of Seattle, and at least as far as reaction to COVID goes. So, I don't want to be hyperbolic about it. I do think it could have a fairly significant effect.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting to see that, especially with the focus that Mayor Harrell is trying to put back on downtown and what happens with the business community here too, with Amazon pulling this out. So a lot to look at over the next couple of months here. And I wanted to talk about one more issue that's causing a bit of a stir in Olympia, David, that I think has an intersection, if you will, with your work in transportation. Police vehicle chases, where officers can chase after a suspect fleeing in a car or a truck. A few bills connected to this have made it past the first cutoff date for legislation at the state capitol with bipartisan support. And the backstory here, folks, lawmakers put several police reforms into effect in 2021 in the wake of the George Floyd murder, including cutting back on police chases, which can and have killed innocent bystanders. Present day, many law enforcement agencies are saying, well, that's great with that, but now more and more suspects are simply fleeing the scene. So officers want to reclaim, I should say, some of the discretion they had in chasing a suspect. I think this is a really interesting issue here, David, an interesting debate. And I'm trying to figure out your thoughts on where do you see this issue ending up? Will police get some more leeway to engage in vehicle chases? What do you think?
I think it, I do think there's probably political support for it because the Republicans are kind of all in. And quite a few
some
Democrats
Dems too, for sure.
Yeah, a good number of Democrats are too. The real question, though, for me is kind of in the Senate. If Manka Dhingra, the chair of I can't remember the exact committee name, the Law and Justice Committee or whatever it is, kind of what if she allows it to move forward, and kind of what, because she is clearly skeptical of rolling this back right away. I think on the notion that. It hasn't been around that long. We don't have a great understanding of the effects of it. And so she sort of wants to take some more time and look into what this law has done. Meanwhile, Republicans and some Democrats have made up their minds on it based, mostly on, again, crime statistics are always really tough because there's usually a lot of reasons why certain things are happening, and that gives people freedom to pick and choose the ones they like. But it is undeniable that there are a lot of, the number of kind of extreme speeding events is up, according to the Washington State Patrol. And there are plenty of anecdotes from police officials who say, more people are running from the scene. It's hard to measure all of that and say that it's all because of this one law, but they say that it is. So I don't know. I don't know how it'll end up. I think the real kind of question mark right now is what happens in the Senate with it.
Yeah. No, you're right about what Senator Dhingra is saying. And she's really pushing, it sounds like, David, for this other option to create a work group of sorts where you'd have law enforcement, you'd have community working together and create this kind of model vehicle pursuit policy, as she's calling it there. And so that might be the piece that actually survives the legislative cutoffs, because I think from Dhingra's perspective, it's like, hey, you know what? This is doing what it was intended to do. We don't have as many of these chases involving police, which, I mean, this happened in King County in 2016, chase after a shoplifter. And oh no, a number of people were killed that, should not have been involved in the situation at all. And that's what led King County to do it. Of course, the largest jurisdiction in the state. And so I think that, I don't know. I know that what works in King County doesn't work statewide, but just this basic idea of, being safe and doing these pursuits in a safe way. I don't know. The devil's in the details here for sure, but it looks like that whole idea of studying this further, which nobody likes to hear when they want an urgent answer, but this idea of studying this a little bit further with some different constituency groups here might be the thing that survives out of the legislature this time.
Yeah, that's my read too.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll see what happens. Oh, and the other one too. Have you heard about this one, David, where Redmond police are doing it? It's kind of like one of Spider-Man's like little spider sense deals that he would like toss on the bad guys, and when they go away and you could track them down later, they have this little GPS device they can throw at the car there. I
did read about that. Yeah, I did read about that.
Yeah, I don't think it's called the Spider-Man system, but
no, right.
It does. With great power comes great responsibility. Remember that, everybody. All right, well, tell you what, we're going to work on another transportation issue here that David has talked about a little bit over the past couple of weeks. The right turn on a red light. We're all used to making it, but it could soon face some limits with a new move by the state. David's got the story on Transportation Talk. David, I saw a story that you wrote in the Seattle Times recently about the state thinking about limiting when driving turn right on a red light. And I started chanting, "It's my right to turn right." I was just thinking about this and wondering, why is the state considering changing a law that's been around for decades? What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, this is a bill that it's not like I'm the first to write about this. We've been talking about this since the beginning of the session. It came up pretty early, this proposal, but I wanted to take a little bit more time on it because I was interested in the history of it.
You go down some good wormholes with these things, man. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, exactly. But they're talking about it because 745 people were killed on Washington's roads last year, which is just a huge number of people, and so they're looking for any way to try and cut down on that. And I think Right on Red that's been kind of a object of activism for a lot of folks, particularly in cities, particularly from disability groups, because people in wheelchairs or with some kind of disability say that they feel very, very vulnerable when they're crossing crosswalks. Sometimes they're low to the ground. You hear the stories of drivers they're looking left, trying to find a way in. They don't look right. The data on it is a little hard because they don't track that many sort of specific.
Right.
This driver was turning right on red. You can
look at
how many collisions there are in intersections. You can look at how many collisions there are on right turns. You can look at how many failures to yield there are. So you can sort of kind of circle the issue a little bit, but you can't actually tell how many collisions there are. And then even when you can, that doesn't really capture near misses, which is, I think, kind of a source of constant fear for people with disabilities. So this would limit right turns 1,000 feet from basically anywhere, like with vulnerable people. So senior centers or kindergartens or daycare centers or parks or libraries or things like that. I don't know that it's going to survive. It's got a couple more days before the transportation committees get cut off, and it seems like it might be one of those things that's just controversial enough that it doesn't make it. We'll see. And there's some logistical questions around it too. You'd have to put up signs basically anywhere that right turns are not allowed, and that adds up pretty quickly. That would end up being pretty expensive for both the state and the local jurisdiction. So, the question of how much is the juice worth the squeeze for lawmakers is not totally there. That said, I don't think it's an issue that's going to go away. So if it doesn't survive this year, I wouldn't be surprised if it came back next year.
It just feels like with those numbers rising, lawmakers are considering any and all possibilities, even if they were able to save a couple of lives with people that made a right turn that hit someone or what have you. It seems like they're looking at a number of different things are in the portfolio this year to try to, and this is one of them, to try to reduce that number, that it feels like to me.
Yeah. And one person that I talked to, this guy, Bill Schultheis, made a pretty good point, which is if the goal is in fact Vision Zero, which the state says it is, and the city, Seattle says their goal is to have zero traffic deaths. If that's the goal, then in some ways it doesn't matter if the number of people getting killed on right turns on red is huge or small. If that number is any, and your actual goal is to get to zero, you have to do those little things too. And I thought that was kind of an interesting point. And if that sounds unrealistic to you, then perhaps you should revisit whether or not Vision Zero is in fact your goal.
Right. Good point there. Making those aspirational goals a reality is what it's all about. So thank you for that, David. And it is time to wrap up. And I wanted to point out, you mentioned this on Twitter, you celebrated the 50th anniversary of the MV Spokane ferry last week, and a proud merchant vessel is she. That ferry was a super ferry, as it was called in 1973. I was looking at some of the old stats on this. Is she still looking super? How was the ride? What was it like on the Spokane?
Well, the first thing you notice is this. Every time I walk on the Spokane, I'm like, oh, I'm on one of the old boats. You kind of know it's an old boat. But I think I had seen somewhere else kind of remark that it was the 50th anniversary, and then I happened to be riding the ferry that day, and I was like, am I on the Spokane? And I went and found the little plaque, and lo and behold, it was sitting there celebrating the 50th anniversary of that boat all by my lonesome. No one else on the boat seemed to have any idea.
You had a little celebration for yourself, and that's fine. That's a good thing. It's a good thing to Good thing to toast. I'm glad she's still floating out there. Always. Well, thank you, David, as always, for joining me here. And thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Listen wherever you'd like. The podcast is on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Please do also find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon and show your support. Thanks for watching on Converge Media as well. We'll see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.